Welcome back. I've always believed revenge is the darkest form of justice. But these cases made me realize it isn't justice at all. It's what happens when someone decides the law isn't enough. From a man stabbed to death just by handing out donations to a quiet parking lot where one final meeting leaves a body sprawled across the asphalt. It was October 6, 2021, at a neighborhood charity fair in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Folding tables lined a small park, local groups handed out food and clothing, and families moved from booth to booth on a cool afternoon. Mason Hargrove, a 30-year-old warehouse employee, had arrived early to help set up one of the donation stands. Over the past year, he had quietly spent much of his free time volunteering around town. That morning, he carried boxes, arranged supplies, and helped visitors without ever trying to draw attention to himself. A year earlier, Mason had caused a crash while driving under the influence. The collision took the life of Alalee Fernsby, 23 years old, the only daughter of Victor Fernsby, a 64-year-old retired diesel mechanic. Mason later accepted a plea agreement and received probation instead of prison. The sentence divided the community. Even after the court case ended, many people continued arguing over whether the punishment had been fair enough. Victor could never accept the outcome. He attended every hearing, then began taking part in meetings for families who had lost loved ones. Friends noticed he still carried a picture of Alalee wherever he went, and every time Mason's name appeared in local news, the anger seemed to return. Mason's volunteer work was sometimes promoted on community social media pages, and investigators later learned Victor had seen one announcing the charity fair and Mason's involvement before the event. I have always believed losing a child is a pain that most people can never truly understand. But I also believe that when grief slowly becomes someone's only focus, it can begin leading them toward decisions that only create more heartbreak. Mason knew some people would never forgive him, but he still chose to help wherever he could. Other volunteers remembered him arriving early and staying late to help. He seemed to understand that nothing could erase what had happened, yet he believed doing good was the only way he could move forward. Witnesses later said Victor stood near the edge of the park for several minutes, watching Mason help visitors before walking toward the booth. Mason had just finished helping an older couple carry donated bags to their car when Victor approached. Several people noticed the two men recognize each other almost immediately. Nearby conversations grew quieter as people sensed the tension. Watching a place built around kindness turn into the scene of violence is something I hope I never experience. It reminds me how quickly years of pain can spill into the lives of complete strangers. Instead, the conversation quickly became tense. Witnesses said Victor suddenly pulled a folding knife from his jacket and began stabbing Mason repeatedly in the upper chest. Mason stumbled backward into the donation table, knocking boxes of donated food onto the ground. But Victor continued the attack even after Mason collapsed. Volunteers immediately rushed toward the two men as nearby visitors scrambled away from the booth. Several adults finally managed to pull Victor away by force, ending the attack, while a few bystanders began recording only after realizing the confrontation had turned into a violent assault. Mason collapsed beside the donation table after suffering devastating injuries. Nearby volunteers desperately tried to help him, while others called 911. Despite their efforts, the extent of his wounds left little chance of survival. Officers reached the park within minutes and found Victor still standing nearby. He did not try to escape and offered no resistance as he was taken into custody. Detectives collected security footage, cell phone videos, and witness statements. They also confirmed Victor had traveled directly to the park after seeing the public announcement about Mason's volunteer work, ruling out any chance encounter. Medical examiners ruled that Mason died from multiple stab wounds that caused catastrophic blood loss and extensive internal injuries. During the trial, prosecutors argued that Victor's actions were driven by a year of unresolved anger over his daughter's death rather than a sudden loss of control. The jury later found him guilty after reviewing evidence from both the earlier crash and the homicide. Victor was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. To me, this story shows that justice and revenge may seem alike to someone consumed by grief, but they never end the same way. Mason spent the last year trying to make peace with his past. The next story follows a son carrying wounds that never truly healed. It was June 24, 2018, at a family home in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Boxes were stacked along the walls, old furniture had been moved into the garage, and a small workshop behind the house was being cleaned before the property went up for sale. Elidor Dankworth, a 61-year-old roofing contractor, wanted to spend the weekend sorting through decades of tools and equipment. He hoped to decide what was worth keeping before the move. His son, Owen Dankworth, a 31-year-old heating and cooling technician, had returned home to help with the cleanup. Relatives believed working together on the house might finally put years of family problems behind them. Owen had lived away for a long time, but coming back meant spending several days inside the same home, where much of his childhood had been marked by conflict. I think many families become so used to hiding their problems that people outside the home never realize how serious things really are. Sometimes the deepest scars are the ones nobody else can see. That afternoon, a neighbor across the street saw Elidor and Owen carrying old shelves and toolboxes between the workshop and the yard. The work looked ordinary, and nothing about it seemed unusual. Later, the same neighbor heard a loud crash from behind the house. Heavy tools often shifted while people cleaned garages, so no one rushed over to investigate. Judith Dankworth returned home later that afternoon and went looking for her husband when she noticed the yard had suddenly gone quiet. She found Elidor inside the workshop and immediately called for help. The first people to arrive initially believed Elidor had been fatally injured while moving heavy equipment. A large storage shelf had fallen, making the scene appear to show a tragic accident during the cleanup. As detectives and forensic specialists examined the workshop, they quickly noticed several details that did not fit an accidental death. The position of nearby tools and equipment looked out of place, and some of Elidor's injuries could not be explained by a falling shelf alone. What first appeared to be a workplace accident was soon treated as a homicide investigation. I always wonder how different stories like this might have been if someone had found real help years before everything reached this point. Looking back is easy, but changing the ending is much harder. Detectives began rebuilding the afternoon step by step. Security cameras from neighboring homes helped confirm when people entered and left the property. Phone records matched most of Owen's movements, but parts of his timeline did not fit the physical evidence inside the workshop. After detectives asked about the family's history, Judith handed over journals and old records she had quietly kept through the years. They described repeated domestic problems involving Elidor that stretched back decades. Relatives also explained that while things had seemed calmer recently, living inside the family home again had brought back painful memories for Owen that many believed had never fully healed. As forensic specialists reconstructed the scene, they determined the fatal injuries had occurred before the shelving unit fell. Investigators concluded that during an argument inside the workshop, Owen grabbed a steel framing hammer that had been resting on a nearby workbench. As Elidor turned away toward the storage shelves, Owen struck him in the side of the head. The impact sent Elidor stumbling into the metal shelving unit before he collapsed onto the concrete floor. Owen then delivered several more blows to his father's head until he stopped moving. After realizing Elidor had died, Owen pulled the heavy metal storage shelf forward, sending it crashing over the body. He scattered tools across the floor and repositioned nearby equipment to make it appear that the shelving unit had accidentally collapsed while Elidor was working alone. The staged scene explained why the physical evidence failed to match the original version of events. When detectives confronted Owen with the medical findings, surveillance footage, witness statements, and the timeline they had reconstructed, he admitted responsibility. Prosecutors later argued the killing was not the result of one argument that afternoon, but retaliation after years of abuse inside the home. For me, this case shows that living with abuse can leave lasting damage, but revenge does not erase that pain. It only passes the suffering on to someone else. Medical examiners ruled the official cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head. Owen was charged with first-degree murder and later convicted, receiving a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case also renewed public discussion about the lasting effects of domestic violence, reminding many people that family violence can continue shaping lives long after it seems to have disappeared. Up next is someone who believed an old chapter of life had already been left behind. It was April 10, 2022, at a wedding reception in Charleston, South Carolina. Guests filled a small event hall decorated with flowers, round dinner tables, and a dance floor in the center of the room. Friends and family enjoyed dinner, while photographers and videographers captured what everyone believed would be one of the happiest nights of Ava Alaband's life. Ava Alaband, a 37-year-old wedding planner, had spent months organizing the celebration for herself and her husband, Ethan Carlisle. After years of helping other couples celebrate their weddings, she was finally able to enjoy one of her own. Years earlier, Ava had been engaged to Nolan Mercer, a 39-year-old heating and cooling technician. Their relationship ended after Ava discovered Nolan had secretly used money from their wedding savings to cover gambling debts. The engagement collapsed, mutual friends sided with Ava, and Nolan eventually lost many of those friendships. Although 6 years passed without direct contact, investigators later learned Nolan never accepted responsibility. Instead, he convinced himself that Ava had ruined his reputation and stolen the future he believed should have been his. Seeing Ava happily starting over with someone else only deepened that resentment. When a longtime mutual friend invited Nolan to the wedding, believing enough time had healed old wounds, he accepted without hesitation. But she did not know that he attended not to celebrate, but because he saw it as his last opportunity to confront the woman he blamed for his downfall. Watching someone's happiest day end in tragedy is something I still struggle to understand. The past can't be rewritten, but some people become so consumed by revenge that they stop caring about everyone else who will suffer because of it. The reception continued like any other wedding. Guests laughed between courses, children played near the dance floor, and friends lined up to congratulate the newly married couple. Because Ava was accustomed to hosting events, she spent much of the evening thanking guests personally. Nolan remained unusually quiet. Several guests later recalled that he rarely smiled and spent much of the evening watching Ava from across the room. Later in the evening, Ava stopped briefly at Nolan's table to thank him for attending. Witnesses described the exchange as polite but tense. After Ava walked toward a hallway leading to the restrooms, Nolan quietly followed. Moments later, guests heard shouting echo through the hallway, followed by a sudden crash. When several rushed toward the noise, they found Nolan behind Ava in a narrow storage alcove. A thin length of wire pulled tightly around Ava's neck. Ava desperately clawed at the wire while struggling to break free, but by the time guests forced Nolan away, Ava had already collapsed to the floor, unresponsive. Guests immediately called 911, while others began CPR. Paramedics arrived within minutes and transported Ava to a nearby hospital, but despite extensive resuscitation efforts, she never regained consciousness and was pronounced dead. Nolan remained at the venue until officers arrived and arrested him without resistance. Detectives recovered hallway surveillance footage and numerous witness statements. During a search of Nolan's belongings, investigators recovered the wire used in the attack. They also found evidence that Nolan had repeatedly viewed Ava's wedding announcement, researched the venue weeks before the ceremony, and deliberately accepted the invitation after confirming Ava would be there. The county medical examiner ruled Ava's death a homicide caused by ligature strangulation. The injuries were consistent with witness accounts and the physical evidence recovered at the scene. Prosecutors argued the evidence demonstrated planning rather than a spontaneous, emotional outburst. Nolan's years of resentment, combined with his decision to attend the wedding armed with the wire and isolate Ava before confronting him, established premeditation. The jury found Nolan Mercer guilty of murder. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, citing the calculated nature of the crime and the lasting trauma inflicted on the families and guests who witnessed it. No celebration should ever become the place where someone settles an old score. To me, this case is a reminder that revenge rarely ends with the intended victim. It scars innocent people and leaves families carrying the consequences for the rest of their lives. We've got 2 more disturbing revenge tragedies still ahead, so hit that subscribe button if you want to see how settling the score turned into deadly consequences. It was February 14, 2017, inside a customer service office in Phoenix, Arizona. Employees were settling into another normal workday. Phones rang across the room, people walked between desks carrying paperwork, and the break room stayed busy as workers grabbed coffee before returning to their stations. Jeannie Umbenhauer, a 41-year-old department supervisor, had already started checking schedules and answering questions from her team. She preferred routine, and after years with the company, most employees knew exactly where she would be each morning. Cheney had supervised the department for several years. Many employees respected that she treated everyone equally and expected company policies to be followed. Denise Corbett, a 43-year-old former customer service representative, saw things differently. Months earlier, Cheney had documented repeated attendance violations, unauthorized customer account adjustments, and altered performance records. An internal audit confirmed the misconduct had cost the company thousands of dollars, and Denise was terminated for falsifying company records. Instead of accepting responsibility, she convinced herself Cheney had personally ruined her career and continued blaming her long after losing her job. It always amazes me how workplace disagreements that seem ordinary can quietly grow into something much darker. Sometimes the most dangerous grudges are the ones nobody realizes are still alive. That morning, Denise returned to the office claiming she needed to collect belongings left behind after her termination. She signed in at reception and was escorted toward human resources. When the HR employee briefly stepped away to retrieve paperwork, Denise slipped into the nearby break room. The room was empty. She recognized the insulated travel cup Cheney used every morning. Denise removed a small container from her purse and poured sodium azide, a highly toxic chemical, into the cup before returning to the hallway. The entire detour lasted less than a minute. A few minutes later, Cheney entered the break room, prepared her usual morning drink, and returned to work. During a staff meeting, coworkers noticed she looked pale. She complained of dizziness and nausea before collapsing. Employees immediately called 911, but despite emergency treatment at a nearby hospital, she died a short time later. With no visible injuries, many initially believed she had suffered a medical emergency. Detectives were not convinced. Investigators collected Cheney's drink cup and sent it for laboratory testing. The analysis detected sodium azide. Because coworkers confirmed the cup belonged only to Cheney, detectives concluded someone had deliberately targeted her. I can't imagine arriving at work expecting another ordinary day and unknowingly taking the sip that would end your life. Investigators reviewed visitor logs, badge records, surveillance footage, and employee interviews. Human Resources confirmed Denise had repeatedly blamed Cheney for her dismissal. Security footage showed Denise entering the break room for less than a minute during her visit, matching the electronic access records. Former co-workers also told detectives Denise often claimed Cheney had taken everything from her. Combined with the forensic evidence, surveillance footage, and witness statements, investigators identified Denise as the primary suspect. During questioning, Denise denied involvement, but prosecutors argued she had carefully planned the killing by using her scheduled visit as an opportunity to poison Cheney. The county medical examiner ruled the official cause of death as acute sodium azide poisoning. Investigators concluded the poisoning had been deliberate and specifically targeted Cheney. A jury later convicted Denise of first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Following the case, the company strengthened visitor access procedures, required terminated employees to remain under continuous escort, and expanded surveillance around employee-only areas. To me, this case shows what can happen when someone refuses to accept responsibility and allows resentment to take control. One decision destroyed two lives. One ended forever, and the other behind prison walls. Cheney had no reason to believe she was being singled out that day. The final story follows two people who agreed to meet, each hoping the past would finally stay behind them. It was August 3, 2020, in a quiet commercial district of Henderson, Nevada. Most repair shops had already closed for the day, leaving only a few employees finishing their shifts. Behind the buildings, a nearly empty parking lot held only a handful of vehicles. Travis Boone, a 39-year-old temporary construction worker, drove there after agreeing to meet someone he had known for more than a year. He believed the meeting would finally settle the conflict that had followed them since a criminal investigation changed both of their lives. The other person was Katie Sallow, a 34-year-old landscaping business owner. The previous year, Katie had survived an attempted kidnapping after escaping from a man who tried to force her into a vehicle. Detectives identified Travis as their primary suspect, but prosecutors declined to file charges because the evidence could not prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. Although Travis remained free, Katie later reported unwanted messages and seeing him near places she regularly visited. Whether intentional or not, each incident reopened the fear she had struggled to overcome. Her business business partner, Megan Ortiz, repeatedly urged her to let investigators handle every complaint instead of confronting him herself. "I cannot imagine living with the memory of nearly losing your freedom, only to keep wondering if the same person might return. At the same time, I believe unresolved trauma can cloud judgment until fear begins making decisions instead of reason." A few days before the meeting, Travis contacted Katie, asking if they could meet one last time. Investigators said he wanted to apologize, deny ever intending to harm her, and convince her to stop believing he was still threatening her. Katie agreed, hoping a face-to-face conversation would finally end the ordeal. Megan begged her to cancel, but Katie believed it was her only chance for closure. Phone records confirmed the meeting had been arranged in advance. Security cameras showed both vehicles entering the parking lot from opposite directions. Workers finishing their shifts saw Travis and Katie speaking calmly beside their vehicles. Witnesses said Travis eventually reached into his pickup truck, telling Katie he wanted to hand her an envelope. That single movement changed everything. Detectives later learned the gesture triggered vivid memories of the attempted kidnapping. When Katie said her attacker had reached into a vehicle moments before grabbing her, Katie stepped backward and shouted for him to stop. Travis continued toward her holding the envelope, apparently trying to explain himself. Believing she was about to relive the attack, Katie drew the handgun she was legally licensed to carry and fired several rounds. Travis collapsed beside his truck. Nearby workers called 911, but he died at the scene. Detectives collected surveillance footage, phone records, text messages, and witness statements. The evidence confirmed the meeting had been voluntary and showed Travis never displayed a weapon. Investigators also reviewed the earlier kidnapping case and Katie's later harassment reports. "I keep thinking about how devastating it must be when a victim never receives the legal resolution they hoped for. But confronting someone while carrying years of unresolved fear can turn a search for closure into another irreversible tragedy." Megan testified that she had pleaded with Katie not to meet Travis alone because she feared the encounter would end badly. Prosecutors argued Travis was unarmed and trying to end the conflict when Katie opened fire, while the defense claimed her past trauma made her believe she faced an immediate threat. The coroner ruled Travis's official cause of death to be multiple gunshot wounds to the chest. After rejecting Katie's self-defense claim, the jury convicted her of second-degree murder, and she was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison with parole eligibility after serving the required minimum term. The case reignited debate about supporting victims whose cases cannot be prosecuted, showing how unresolved trauma and a search for closure instead ended in another tragic loss.